It's time. It's time for women to live better. It's time to feel healthier. It's time to live longer. It's time to enjoy your routines. It's time to understand your body and your mind. Welcome to It's Time with myself, Dr. Jen Wagner, and my partner, Linsly Donnelly, powered by Prosper. Thank you for joining us today. This podcast is designed to provide general information. It does not in any way establish a patient-doctor relationship or provide other professional services, such as medical advice. Please contact your appropriate healthcare professional before making any changes to your lifestyle or routine. Hi, it's Dr. Jen.
And Linsly.
And we're so glad you're back with us as we dive into the next chapter of this journey.
Well, thanks for continuing this conversation. And one of the things that we tried to promise in what we would do with our time together was make it easier to feel better. And there are two tools we wanted to introduce today in order to make that work. One is a little bit of a framework. So we'll go through our pyramid of how to filter through different ideas based on which part of the pyramid typically delivers more bang for the buck.
Absolutely.
So we'll talk about the pyramid. And then the second thing will be
we're going to talk about prototyping.
Yeah.
And what we mean by prototyping is how to try on some of these ideas and strategies in a low stress manner that doesn't take a ton of effort. We don't want to redo the way we live our lives, and we don't want to ask you to do that either. And so how can we incorporate some of these new ideas into what we're already doing?
Yep. And so we'll call it prototyping. And then specifically what we'll call it is the prototyping habit, so that we help reinforce the idea that it's something that you continue to do. Back to that myth number 10, one and done. This is a habit. So we're going to make it accessible.
Exactly.
Why don't we flash it up for people who are watching on YouTube? And if you take a look at it on YouTube, it's a little easier to see, but if you just start envisioning it while you're driving and you're listening to us at 2x, like I'm always doing on podcasts, just imagine a pyramid. It is a triangle, and we're going to work from the bottom to the top, and we will also address the sides as well. So if we use that as a framework, we'll talk about what is kind of the most important foundational component of that pyramid across the bottom.
Absolutely. So what we always start with is mindset. Right. And if we don't approach some of this with the right mindset, we're never going to incorporate it into our daily lives. And so how do we develop that mindset? How do we incubate and take care of that mindset? How do we share that mindset with others?
Absolutely. And we'll have an entire episode talking about what we call the mindset gym. So just like you go somewhere to kind of build the biceps, this is your at-home version of a mindset gym. So save that for a later time.
Absolutely. And then when we build to the next level, it kind of gets into the true building blocks of what we're going to talk about.
And that speaks back to our sneak peeks, right? So, pop quiz, if you had a chance to listen to the episode before, there were 3 things that were the most high impact levers that you could pull if you had 1 minute or 1 second in a day. And those are the 3 levers that we talk about in that second strip across the pyramid. The first one being movement.
And then we're going to move into sleep.
And then nourishment, which includes fuel and food like protein, and also supplements.
Right. And hydration.
We
kind of bunch all of that into our nourishment. So then we're going to move up to the next. And, as we move up the pyramid, things get a little bit less tactical and a little bit more theoretical or philosophical almost.
Right.
So next we're going to move into our community and our relationships. And we know from studies that have been done for decades, if we look at like the Harvard longitudinal study on happiness.
Or the nuns in Europe, which I thought was amazing too.
Right. That the number one driver of happiness, which was also the key to longevity, was sustainable relationships.
Absolutely. So we'll talk about community and relationships and a little bit of a taboo or a tangent, which is sexual health.
Absolutely.
Like being healthy and having a strong understanding of, and kind of being healthy and having a strong understanding of and aptitude for sexual health and how that plays out 45 to 114. It's just like thinking of cardio health or thinking about your cognitive health. So we'll talk about that in the context of relationships and community.
Absolutely. And then we're going to go up to the next level, which gets, I think, for a lot of people, even harder to understand. and that's spirituality.
Absolutely. So as we go through life and we kind of are doing that, swinging from one ring to the next, there's a moment when we all pause and say, what's it all about? Where do I fit into this grand scheme? And at least for a lot of our cohort, it feels like that happens more and more between 45 and 65. And so giving ourselves a framework for it, a dialogue for how spirituality can serve you and how it can be accessible, and thinking about joy and happiness over the long term is something we want to make sure we share the research-backed lessons learned as well.
Absolutely. And those are some of the guests I think I'm most excited to have on too, is some of the people that have become spiritual advisors in our lives. And I think it's important to, and we'll get into this in a much deeper level, but to separate spirituality from religion.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I think that almost every person has a connection to something that's bigger than themselves. And that's really what we're talking about with spirituality, is just belonging to something that is outside of yourself, whatever that is. For some people, it is religion. For other people, it can be a variety of things. And
it's
so
nature, top of the mountain, right?
Exactly. So can't wait to dive in there. And I will tell you that was leaving kind of very scientific clinical medicine. When I first got introduced to these ideas of spirituality and things like that, it's really hard. And I will laugh, and hopefully we will have Reverend Sue on with us at one point in time. She really challenged me when I met her to explore these parts of myself that I actually didn't even really knew were there or needed to be nurtured or were that important. So
we'll have to do a couple of series.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, then bring us home. What's the peak?
Well, so the peak of the pyramid, we are calling emerging modalities. And these are things that we're all hearing a lot about. There is some science behind them. There will be likely more and more research behind them. But it's everything from contrast therapy, which is, saunas, to cold plunges, psychedelics, compression therapy. There are lots on our radar with Prosper,
Absolutely. And I think you're the perfect person to talk about these, because I feel like you try them all. The newest, latest, and greatest. She's sometimes more adventurous than I am when it comes to these things. But I think, even blood flow restriction training, like all of these emerging modalities. And for a lot, there's not a ton of science behind them. We really are attracted to these things because they are new and up and coming. And coming from the medical side, sometimes we are slower to embrace these new technologies, because in medicine we do these evidence-based, tried true practices, and this is cutting edge. This is new. And so these are things that we will introduce, that we will try to explain to the best of our ability. And some are higher risk, higher reward. Some are very low risk, and if they work for you, doesn't matter that there's not a lot of science behind it. So all fun things to definitely explore, and hopefully we can even do a little show and tell in some of that.
Yes, and probably some debunking of myths in that one too.
Absolutely. I think what we don't want to ignore is the sides of the triangle, because as we've talked about, as we've gotten to know you guys, is we are very data driven, and that we encourage people to not rely on metrics, but to check in every once in a while to kind of gauge what's working and what's not. So I think the first and foremost is, how are you feeling?
Right.
But then we can go deeper than just how are you feeling, and really, are you starting to see changes that are really going to impact your health now, impact your longevity going forward, and do some of those things?
Absolutely. So I think, both of us come from backgrounds that rely on data and tracking, whether, much higher stakes in the health world, but the requirement is a level of comfort collecting data that you think is relevant, and then being able to have a baseline and a comparison based on whatever actions you tried to play with. So we'll talk a little bit about what do the different metrics mean, what's realistic to track change, and then what are the different either wearables or platforms or software services that are out there to support that. And we'll share the experiences that we've had with 20 of them to see, not necessarily recommend this one or avoid that one, but experience sharing of what we saw and we're able to really track and convert to actions and repeatable things to incorporate based on those.
And I also think trying to declutter what devices as much as we can, how those algorithms were developed, because most of them were developed on a population that is not representative of us.
Back to female physiology.
Yeah, back to young men, and or they were probably developed on young men, and maybe in some certain circumstances younger women, if we're lucky. But how we can use data and how we can use these devices to trend what's going on with us. So even if the algorithms aren't built for us, I think that we can still find value.
Trend lines are there, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
Which you definitely want to have if we think about that second idea about the prototyping habit. So we offer this framework as a way for you to filter which ideas to start with. If you're joining us in sequence, fantastic. If you're joining us after the fact and there are a number of these episodes released, then we might offer that this is a way to sequence through them to get some high leverage results or quick fixes in your own mind earlier in your game and earlier as you're exploring them. But the overall approach that we would put on offer is really this idea of a prototyping habit. And the word prototype, it comes from the product development background. A lot of folks who've been in the startup worlds have heard it, minimum viable product, and you put up the most lightweight way to test an idea to see if you get signal. Does it work? And the example that I share with a lot of clients is when I did this in kind of a business context, when we were developing software and developing large scale platforms, we would literally take a cardboard poster board, like what our kids are using right now for HOCO, homecoming posters. We would take that and we would draw what was the app going to look like and what was the platform going to look like. And we would go into Golden Gate Park and ask people and get signal very quickly. Did they understand what it was for? Did it matter? It didn't require a line of code. And so that level of lightweight trying is what the idea of prototyping is. And we'll try to bring examples of how to apply that mindset in each one of our episodes when we're working through a series of ideas so that it becomes a habit that every time you approach something, you don't have to do it all at once. Just try a little bit. See if did that feel any different?
Right.
Did your data show anything different?
Yeah, I think that those are great points. And I want you to go a little bit deeper into your 2x2 thought formation around this for people that are not familiar with that. But before we jump into that 2x2 matrix, I think the other really important thing is, and you say this all the time, and it's one of my favorite lines of yours to steal. There are several, but this is one of my favorites.
Repurpose them. That's not stealing. It's amplifying. It's amplifying. Not stealing.
We are talking about 1% change compounded over time. And I think we can't stress that enough. We are not, I mean, you can if you want, but we are not saying you need to blow up everything you're doing, start over, throw everything in your cabinets and kitchen away, join 3 fancy gyms. That's not this. This is really tactical, implementable stuff that we are going to provide the science behind, but to create lifelong habits.
Yes. I mean, I wish I could say I come up with that myself, but it's like, I think that's James Clear on Atomic Habits when he gives the great example, though. If you can imagine, I think he does a jet and a ship a little bit at a time, it would go totally a different course. And that's the imagery that we have in our minds when we're doing it. Let's take a minute here. We'll put up this 2x2. And again, for folks 2xing it on the audio on the podcast, just imagine that the horizontal axis, the x-axis, helps you understand how impactful something is. Is it a low impact lever or a high impact lever? And the y-axis, the vertical axis up and down, at the bottom might be, am I interested in this? Or at the top would be, I'm super interested in this. And so top left would be, it's a super high impact idea and based on the research and the data and the science. And I'm really interested in trying it. And so you start with that top left and just go, okay, I'm going to grab ideas over there. The one that, we find people often kind of wrestle with, for example, emerging modalities is like the cold plunge, right? There's a little bit of data, maybe like a 3 on a scale of 1 to 5. And for some people, it's like a 1 in terms of what they're interested in. So maybe not, So sauna, more data, like a 5, absolutely. And sounds really chill, like a 5. So go over there. So that is the idea. As you're hearing all these ideas, you can actually print out, we have this in our show notes, you can print out this little 2x2 and just jot stuff down. And that's a way to think about where you start.
And I think too, it's important as you start to prototype habit is to celebrate the win.
Yes.
I think we forget to do that. We're really, really good at saying, oh, I didn't do that today, and beating ourselves up.
Yes.
Instead of saying, you know what? I kind of kicked ass this week.
Yes.
About 80% of the time I was on target.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you, for us, like, that's a great, like,
That's
that
a win.
80-20 rule is kind of a rule we live by, that if 80% of the time we're doing the right stuff, that's okay if 20% we don't get to it, we don't want to do it,
Yep.
we forget to do it, whatever the reason is, it's okay.
Yep. I think somebody who I was working with had the great comment, which is, it's better to stink at something and keep the trend line going than, break the perfect trend line for perfect execution.
Right.
So somebody I was working with told me once that I love it, which is, it's better to stink at something than try to be perfect. So don't stop the habit, right? Mm-hmm. Just do it halfway and keep the trend line going. Mm-hmm. And I think our friend David from Ageist, who is just a wonderful input into our thinking about longevity, he physically pats himself on the back. He was sharing that. He's like, good job, David. And I was like, so now I do that more. Like, good job, Linsly. Double pat.
Yep.
So,
yep. And I think, this is also where having an accountability partner or someone that you just can bounce these ideas off, whether it's a great day or a terrible day,
Yep.
We are fortunate to be able to do that for each other, but, find anybody. Sometimes I tell my dog, I rocked today.
Yeah. You could also DM us. We would love to see it.
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
absolutely.
Like, kudos, high five. Yeah, high five.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of, our hope is that you can take this framework and use it to filter all these ideas and take the 2x2 to prioritize which ones you grab.
Mm-hmm. And I also think when it comes to prototyping is start small and feel success. Yes. And I know we just talked about having wins, but I do think that leads then to taking the next step, which might be more challenging, or trying something that seems a little out of your comfort zone, et cetera. And I think the other thing is to be prepared to go slowly. Right. So if we're talking about
speed of thought versus the speed of do.
Right. Exactly. I laugh about that because I have had the reverse experience. I was a collegiate soccer player, and now people are like, do you still like to play? And I'm like, my mind likes to play. My body does not do what it used to, right? So we have to adapt and adjust. Yeah. And so, as we introduce topics like lifting heavy weights, that doesn't mean if you've never lifted a weight, you walk into the gym and pick up the heaviest thing you can pick up. So it's all learning and taking small steps. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that makes the invitation to try not so intimidating. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing is we're going to try to always give examples of what can be done in your house or in places that you're comfortable.
Yeah. When you're on the road too, if you want to keep that trend line, what can you do when you're on the road? I love the idea that you're describing of set the bar low and clear it. So people get interested in the prototyping habit and that concept as well. The Design Your Life resources will be in our show notes. And to the rewiring and the neuroscience we talked about in our prior episode, teaching your brain that it can do these things, it can be taught in small steps so that your brain believes it. Right.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing with that is we will just show you constantly small adjustments. Like, for example, we take a fitness class together that we love. We know we need to adapt some of the movements and some of the suggestions to meet our physiology where we are in life. And so instead of just not going, because it's such a point of community and connection and fun and fills my cup in the morning, I'm just going to change it a little bit.
Yeah. And shout out to the Bo, Wit's bring it on.
Yeah.
Change it.
And we've learned and created whole new classes based on it. And so I think that there are ways to still do what you love and yet slowly incorporate some of these ideas, because a lot of these ideas are going to be counterintuitive to what we've heard our entire lives.
Right. So it's exciting.
Super exciting.
So again, thank you for joining us on this journey of midlife women. Yep. Being able to feel better.
Absolutely.
Easily.
And I'm excited. I feel like we've set the stage with the last few podcasts and got geared up, and now we're going to ready to dive in, and we're going to get into the science, and we're going to get into the tactical pieces, and we're going to start bringing our guests on. So we look forward to you joining us next time.
Awesome. Again, thank you for joining us. Here's to midlife women feeling better
easily. We'll see you next time.